Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall, and I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. And we're super, super excited to be chatting with Lisa Jewell this evening. But before we get started, just wanted to make some general store announcement stuff. So if you were tuning in, that means you guys are aware that unfortunately we do not have Lisa in the store with us this evening. We were hoping to get some actual in-store stuff happening in September, but with the spikes from the Delta variant, we had to cancel all of those events. So the only one that's still outstanding, we were supposed to be chatting with William Kent Kruger next Monday at 7, but we have actually just gotten confirmed today that he is going to be signing with us. Let me get the date pulled up here so I have it right. He's going to be signing with us virtually on Tuesday, September 21st. He is going to be in conversation with David Hesco Wombley Wyden, whose book Winter Counts has pretty much won every mystery award. So definitely check back for that. The store is open. If you guys have not come to see us for a while, we are open for browsing. We've been open since Halloween. It's hard to believe that we've been like open for people to just come in for a year now. We are asking that you wear masks when you come in the store. We just got in the last couple of days over like 50 new varieties of jigsaw puzzles. So if you're sticking at home and you're doing puzzles again, like it's March of last year, come visit us. We've got some really great book-related, plant-related, pet-related ones, all kinds of stuff. We also have signed copies of Lisa Jewell's new book, The Night She Disappeared. Luckily, we were able to get those even with the event cancellation. So I've already dropped a link in the comments if you want to order copies. And as we are chatting with Lisa this evening, if you have any questions, please post those in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and we will get to those in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to get actually, and one more thing before we get started, I wanted to send a huge, huge thank you to Ariel, who is Lisa's publicist with Atria Books and Simon & Schuster. She has been so great to help us, one, get the in-store event set up, and then to set up to pivot to virtual. She's just an extraordinary publicist, and we love getting to work with her. So we want to send a big thank you to her. And also, I'm going to bring Lisa out. We want to send a big thank you to her because it is 7 o'clock here for us, but it's in the middle of the night for her. So we appreciate her doing this at our not usual 1 o'clock in the afternoon for international authors. So I'm going to bring Lisa out. How are you tonight, Lisa?
Hello, I'm great. I am. It's 1 a.m. here, but I am absolutely fine. I'm quite impressed with myself. Myself.
We did an event with Russ Thomas, who's also a UK author, last year. And as we were talking, I was like, oh, thank you so much for doing this in the evening. I had asked your publicist if you wanted to do it during the day. And she said, no, he's happy to do it in the evening. And Russ looked at me and went, I was not given that option. I was like, oh. So we appreciate you being able to do this with us at this time this evening. And as we were saying before we went live, I'm so bummed that we don't actually get to see you in store this year. I know you were looking forward to it. We were looking forward to getting to see you and give you hugs and actually get to see you in person. But I'm glad that we actually get to chat virtually at least.
Yeah, but next year will be the year. Yes.
And one of the nice things about this is that we've gotten to chat with you so much over the last year. When Invisible Girl came out and pairing up with other authors. So it's been great to get to chat and catch up more, but we definitely want to be able to chat and go grab drinks afterwards.
Yeah, doing both would be good. Both. Chatting all throughout the year on Zoom would be lovely, but then once a year, it'd be great to come and hug you and be there and meet people, obviously, as well. Yeah.
So Lisa's new book, The Night She Disappeared, just came out Tuesday. And if you were unfamiliar with Lisa, her official bio is Lisa Jewell is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 19 novels, including The Family Upstairs and Then She Was Gone, as well as Invisible Girl and Watching You. Her novels have sold over 5 million copies internationally, and her work has also been translated into 29 languages. So we were lucky enough to get to host Lisa when I Found You came out a couple of years ago. It was both my coworker Brenda and I, one of our favorite books of the year, and that was our first introduction to Lisa. And so it's just been great to see more and more people get to get introduced to her work and fall in love with Lisa and her work. So I'm super excited to talk about The Night She Disappeared. So to get us started, Lisa, can you just tell us a little bit about the new book?
Yes, I would love to tell you a little bit about the new book. So The Night She Disappeared is essentially, it's about a teenage couple, Zach and Tallulah. They're 19 years old and they're teenage parents. And one hot summer's night, Friday night, they go to the pub and they leave their baby at home with Tallulah's mother, Kim. And while they're at the pub, they hook up with some of the posh kids from the boarding school in the village where they live, who invite them back to this amazing mansion in the countryside for a pool party. And Tallulah texts her mum and says, we've been invited to this pool party. Is it okay if I come back late? And Kim says, stay out as late as you like. But tragically, Tallulah and Zach never come home. And the action kicks off a year later when a new head teacher comes to work at the boarding school in the village. And his girlfriend, Sophie, is in fact a detective novelist. And on her first day at the boarding school, she's exploring the grounds and she finds nailed to a fence on the grounds of the school a cardboard sign with the words "dig here" scrawled on it. So she digs and she finds something, and thus the whole cold case comes back to life.
So one of the things that I love about your books is a common theme in them is missing people. You know, they're not necessarily always murder mysteries. Sometimes there's a murder, but, you know, so many of them feature missing people, which is great because then you never know whether the resolution is, are they going to find this person? Is this person going to be murdered? Like what's going to happen? So what do you think your fascination is with missing person cases?
Well, I think, clearly a missing person is fascinating per se because a missing person is just one huge question mark, and there are no answers and there's no closure. And it's unthinkable that a person can one day be walking among you and the next day just not exist and nobody knows what happened to them. So missing people are just fascinating generally. But from my point of view, because I'm not a planner when I write a book, it's much better for me because I like to leave as many options open as possible. I write very ambiguously, deliberately, because I want to be able to leave my options open. So missing, and so interestingly, in this book, I'd imagined. So one of the only things I knew about this book going into it was that there was going to be this sign that was going to be found in the grounds of a boarding school with "dig here" written on it, and I had assumed that what would be buried under this sign would be human remains. I just assumed that someone was going to dig up some bones. But when I actually came to write that chapter, I suddenly had to backtrack. I thought, oh no, if I put bones here, then we know someone's dead, and I'm not ready to commit to that at this point. I'm not sure if anybody is dead. So I changed it. I didn't put bones there. I put something else there, which is a clue to the case. But yeah, because the missing person is, from my point of view, the easy option, because then I've got the different directions that I can head in.
It always surprises me. I mean, like, as we mentioned, we've been able to talk. You've been to the store multiple times. It always amazes me to hear you say that you don't plot your books because they're so well plotted, and the way that things all come together, it amazes me that you are just able to like get all of this stuff put together with like no planning beforehand.
Yeah, well, it amazes me that people can write books with plans. I don't understand how someone can sit with a notepad or a whiteboard or however it is that planners work and work out in the space of a few days or however long it takes to plan a novel. I have no idea because I've never done it. I don't know if it takes a few days or a couple of months to plan a novel, but to do that without knowing all the in-betweeny bits, because when I write, it's all the in-betweeny bits that give me the clues to the bits, you know, the pivotal bits. And I can't know the pivotal bits until I've written the in-betweeny bits. That's a very basic way of putting it. So from my point of view, that's the only way I can do it, is to literally sit with my fingers on the keyboard and make the words appear on the screen, and then the words on the screen tell me what's happening, and lead me through this maze that I need to find my way through. But yeah, so I don't know how planners do it, and then planners don't know how people like me do it either. So it's just one of those weird things.
And so in the book, we have multiple timelines. We've got, you know, like a year before, and then we've got a year later, and we have kind of a couple of different character perspectives. So when you're writing, are you bouncing back and forth between the time frames and the characters, or do you write one and then go back?
No, that's exactly what I do, and that's it. And it's very deliberate because, again, this is a byproduct of not being a planner. Um, I need as many people as possible in the story with as many different perspectives on what's happened, or what, the mystery, so that I can unfold it for myself. And so that is very, very deliberate. And the only way I can make it work is to divide it up into different people's perspectives and let them, as you said, bounce off each other. And there is this deliberate juxtaposition that I insert at the end of every chapter and the beginning of the next one. Mm-hmm. And they're they're completely interwoven, and the two inform each other. So if I wrote them in one solid strip and then chopped them up and sort of rearranged them, you'd miss those little energetic moments. And that's part of my evil, cunning plan to get people reading through the night. And is, even if not much happens in a chapter, I make sure that there's enough in the last few lines of a chapter to make the reader think, oh, I'll just start the next chapter and see if I want to carry on reading. And then I put just enough in that first few lines in the next chapter for the reader to think, oh, okay, actually, now I really want to know what happens in this chapter. Mm-hmm. And so, so that's absolutely how I do it. And that's the only way I can do it, is to write the chapters in the order in which they appear in the book. So you get those little energetic moments.
Yeah. And so I was telling Lisa before we went live that this is probably my favorite since I found you, and that I had read most of it Monday and had gotten all the way up to like kind of the last part where, like, shit's going to start happening, and was like, I'm too tired, I have to put the book down and go to sleep. But like you said, I love that you have, like, almost every chapter kind of has these kind of almost like mini cliffhangers. And it seems like, as the book starts, they're kind of small little mini cliffhangers, but then like the further you get, you're like, no, you can't break it here. I have to know what happens next. But then, like you said, as soon as you start the next chapter, you're like, you're not at all tempted to just skip ahead because you need to know what happens next too.
Yes, it sounds cynical for me to say it's all done deliberately. It's done deliberately for me as well, because I need that incentive, because I don't know what's going on and I don't know what's happening in the next chapter. I need that incentive as a writer to keep writing as much as the reader needs that incentive to keep reading. So I do it for me and for the reader, that sort of juxtaposition.
So when you're like, typical writing day, you're done for the day, are you stopping at a chapter on one of those little mini cliffhangers so you can figure out where you're going next?
I try to. That for me is the dream day. The dream day is when I finish writing a chapter and I've got that little moment in, and then I know that I'm going to come to the page the next day all full of fire, ready to get that next chapter going. But yeah, so I generally write, it depends on the length of the chapter, but sometimes I'll write half a chapter in a day, and sometimes I'll write a whole chapter in a day. And yeah, the days when I write a whole chapter are really good. I love that feeling of finishing work on a cliffhanger.
So as you mentioned, the character Sophie in the book is a writer herself. She writes, I guess what we would call here, she writes kind of cozy mysteries, kind of little village mysteries. So with her being an author, if you found yourself in the middle of your own real life mystery like she did, do you think that you would solve it kind of in the same way that she did?
Yeah, I would honestly put everything else in my life on the back burner. If I found a sign somewhere that said dig here, it was like, if I watch, remember like where phone booths back in the day, public phones. If I walked past a phone booth and the phone was ringing, I would need to go in and answer that phone and find out who was calling a phone booth. If there's a drama playing out on the street, I have to get involved. I always have to know what is going on. I can't bear to just stand there and watch life unfold and drama unfold and not be part of it. So yeah, if something like that presented itself to me, I would absolutely get involved and want to try and solve the mystery, even if it meant, as Sophie does in the book, sort of abandoning her work in progress. Yes, exactly.
And so if you were, if you did find yourself with this mystery to solve, do you think that you would make a good amateur sleuth?
Yes and no. And as Sophie actually ponders herself in the book, there's a point where she knows that she has this fictional duo of detectives, and in her own mystery where her fictional detectives would go and ask a person a question in order to get some information out of them. But she can't do that because she's not a detective. So she has to kind of sit there and sit on her hands and control herself, because that's not quite her remit. She definitely has those instincts.
So the last time we talked, when we were talking about The Invisible Girl, you talked about kind of some of the research that you needed to do being kind of grueling because you had to learn about incels and kind of all of that stuff. What kind of research did you have to do for this one?
Now, that's a good question. How did I do any research for this
Because
one?
it doesn't seem like you would have to do much aside from like maybe like how a police officer would treat a missing person case. But I would imagine that would be something you would be kind of familiar with already.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do a lot of police procedure for the very reason that I don't really want to spend too long researching it. And you do have to know your police procedure to really do it properly. Yeah. Did I research anything? I did some research into tunnels. Oh. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yes. But so you'd have to read the book to understand about the tunnel. But yes, and not any sort of time consuming. No, this book very much came straight from my head onto the page. It's not really informed by anything that's going on in the world. I don't think so. No, I think this is a very research light book.
Mm-hmm. So it's set in 2017, 2018. Was that purposely so you weren't trying to deal with like kind of contemporary COVID stuff?
Well, actually, I started writing it in February 2020. And so when the pandemic hit, I had 6,000 words on the page. So I'd already introduced the main characters and the premise of the missing girl, but I hadn't got any further. And that actually was a real stumbling block for me to get back into it. Because actually I got COVID myself in March 2020. I was an early adopter. So I ended up spending a week in bed, isolating from my family and all of that. So I had this sort of break anyway. And then it got to the point where I was better and I was allowed back in the house and mingling with my family and time to start work. But every time I thought about these 6,000 words and the tiny shreds of characters that I'd started developing, I just thought, but they're in 2018. How can I write about people who are in 2018? They go to the pub. They hug people when they see them on the street. They've never heard of COVID. They don't know what's around the corner, and it really kind of put me off for a while. I felt really, really stuck. But then I just had to get over myself and just break through that and get back to them. And actually, once I did break through that and get back to them, it was just joyous to live in their world. And I was so glad that I had set it in 2017 and 2018. And in fact, I will, from here on in, I am going to set all my novels either before or after the pandemic. I'm never going to set a novel in a world that includes all the terminology that we've come to use so regularly and all the limitations and weird behaviors that we've had to start undertaking. I don't ever want, and because you cannot write fiction in a world that's so changed and so different and not refer to it and not have it override everything else in the narrative. Yeah. So no, all my books will either be set in blah, blah, blah to 2019 and then X year, whatever year that is, where things return to normal and people stop talking about COVID all the time and can behave naturally, then I'll start again. But I'm never going to set a fictional work in these years.
Yeah, that was kind of my theory of what would happen, early on when we would ask writers, do you think this is something? And most people are like, yeah, no. So I figured we would see a lot of stuff in like 2019 and then afterwards. I actually just finished Victoria Laurie, who does a cozy series. Her book was the first one that I read that had actually like mentioned COVID, and in her book she had said it optimistically just as COVID had ended. So, there was like maybe a mention of, during lockdown, this character was in Scotland, so they have an alibi for this murder, and that was it. So it was nice to be like, this is done. We're moving on.
Yes, I like that. I like that. And I like actually using some of the limitations and weirdness of this to help your plot along in book set on the other side of all of this. That's actually quite cool, and I might do that.
So So you mentioned tunnels. We're not going to give any spoilers away for the book,
Yeah.
but kind of like the family upstairs, there's a house in this book that's kind of almost its own character, and the house is called Dark Place. Can you tell us a little bit about the house?
Yeah, well, so Dark Place, I initially, my whole focus, so for this book, the thing that the starting point, the springboard for me was I wanted to write a novel set in a boarding school. And I'd seen this boarding school many years ago in this beautiful countryside setting in this beautiful village. So I brought that to mind. And that was going to be the building that I was going to be obsessed with, because I always like to be obsessed with the structures that surround my characters. But then I introduced this character called Scarlett, who was in the pub with Tallulah on the night she disappeared, and she's incredibly wealthy, privileged young woman, the same age as Tallulah. She's 19, and I realised that if she lived in a house with a swimming pool, then it was going to be some kind of, not that we don't have a lot of swimming pools in houses over here. It was going to be some sort of awesome house. And so I began to describe this house and just got completely carried away. And suddenly this boarding school in the village was just sort of an irrelevance. I sort of completely lost my obsession with that building and focused in on this building. So Dark Place was originally built in the 1600s. It burnt down, which is why it is called Dark Place. So it's a name that it's had since the 1600s. And ever since then has been rebuilt and extended and improved by a series of inhabitants over the centuries. So it's this sort of like fairy tale kind of Tim Burton-esque house. So it's got the Tudor bit, it's got the Georgian bit, it's got the Victorian bit, and then it's got a big glass box attached to the back, the sort of modern 20th century bit. And it's huge, and there are turrets and tunnels and towers and anterooms and all sorts of things. So yeah, I just went to town on this house. Went to town on it. I just threw everything at it. And I only wish it was real. I wish it was a real house so that I could go and see it. But yeah, it doesn't really exist. But I felt like it did when I was writing it.
So we had a question in the comments. So Ariel wants to know. She wants to know if your fake Wikipedia page for it is accessible anywhere.
I should. There's probably a fake wiki site, isn't there? There's probably a site where there are wiki entries for things from fiction written. Yeah, maybe someone can do one. But yeah, I did. Yeah, so I wrote a Wikipedia entry in the book for this house. So yeah, it'd be amazing.
The house is great, and it also seems like, if you would potentially want to, I know your books are kind of all standalones, but it also seemed like a great place that, like, at some point you were like, oh, I want to go back and tell a different story. Like, it seems like there's potential, like,
yeah. Well, it's on the market, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's for sale. It is for sale, so someone could come along and buy it and have a whole other thing going on there. Yes, that would be fantastic. It could be a little Easter egg, couldn't it?
Yeah, but so do you have any Easter eggs that connect the books together?
Oh. Are there any Easter eggs in this one? No, there are a few. There's a character called Ken who's in 2 of my books. There is something else. Anyway, I'm going to put an Easter egg in the book I'm writing at the moment. I haven't decided what it is yet, but this is the first time I will have. I think when I put Ken in both those books, nobody had even coined the expression Easter egg, so I didn't know what I was doing then, but this time I'm going to deliberately put one in. So yeah,
so it sounds like we as the viewers watching Lisa Jewell Fan Club need to like create our own Lisa Jewell Wikipedia, so that way we can like, oh, this person's here, and we can, that way people know that they're linked.
Yes, I need to do more of that. I think it's time. I think I've got enough of a backlist and a readership now that there might be some appreciation for me to start kind of threading things through and making it into a sort of more of a universe.
So since most of your books or all of your books are standalones, what draws you more to a standalone novel versus trying to do a series?
Just that absolute, it's that sort of back to school fresh state kind of thing of just like, okay, that's all done, finished, gone. Now I got a whole new world to create and new people to play with and new houses to live in and new lives to explore. I love it all being new and fresh. And it's because I'm currently writing the sequel to The Family Upstairs. And so, yeah, I'm finding it's interesting. It's really interesting having to strike that balance between obviously needing readers who haven't read the original book to get up to speed, also not wanting to drag readers who did read the original book down with unwanted detail and repetition. So yes, it's given me a sort of insight into how challenging it must be for people who write series, because you can't assume that everyone who's going to start at the beginning of a series. Lots of readers will come in at the halfway point or what have you. So yeah, it's quite challenging, and it is proving to me how much I really do enjoy writing standalones.
So as a reader, are you a series reader or standalone reader, both?
No, I'm not a series reader. Again, I feel the same way possibly about books, but I keep there's a British author called MJ Craven, and every single book club that I'm on Facebook just raves about him. So I actually bought his entire. He's done a series of 5, which I'm really looking forward to some mythical point in my future life where I will get to just sit and read a whole series in one go, like binge read, like a box set sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that would be my first experience of reading a series. So it's sitting there waiting for the moment for me to get going. But no, I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, it's nice to hear people say that, that's the fantasy, being able to sit down and binge read a whole series, because as a bookseller too, like you don't get to do that because there's always new stuff. So to be able to sit down and I actually just did that over the last year, sort of like a pandemic treat. There's a cozy series that's like 30 books long, and you could just knock one out in an afternoon. So I've just been like, oh, I'm on a reading run, I'm going to pick up one of these, and I've blown through this series that started in the 90s, and it's been really fun, but it's just not something you get to do often because there's always so much other stuff.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have it with being a bookseller. I have it with being an author, that my letterbox is constantly opening and books dropping on my doormat from other authors that people would like me to read. So yes, it's kind of, I don't get to pick and choose what I read as much as someone in a different profession would be able to.
Yeah. I'm just scrolling through some crowd questions here. So you already talked about how you didn't you don't know the ending before you start writing, and so you said the genesis of this book was that sign that said "dig here."
Yeah. So the genesis of the book was like, oh, I've never done a boarding school. I'd like to do a boarding school, and then thinking, well, what would have happened in this boarding school? And then I had this sort of secret history kind of vibe thing of like, oh, maybe somebody died, maybe. Some of the posh students kind of got entangled with some of the kids who live in the village, and something went awry, and blah blah blah. And as I was thinking those things, I just envisaged this sign that said "dig here," and that was it. That was my way in, to the story.
And so in a lot of the other books, they tend to be, I mean, they're kind of suburbs, but they're suburbs in a bigger city. And this one seems like it's a little bit more kind of removed from the bigger city. So what was it like writing kind of a smaller area in this one?
I really enjoyed it. It was 6 years ago. I was in a car driving to a dog breeder out in the countryside to pick up our puppy. And we just drove through this area of Surrey, which is a beautiful county just on the south side of London. And we just kept driving through these stunning villages that I'd never seen before. You expect you have to go way out into the countryside to find such picturesque places. And I didn't think at the time, oh, I'd like to set a book in one of these beautiful villages. But when it came to the idea of a boarding school, I remembered having seen this boarding school, and I remembered what the village looked like and the kind of feel of it. So it was all there in my head. I could picture it as I'd seen it in that fleeting drive through the village 6 years earlier. And so it was lovely having it so visual, having it so clear in my head as I was writing it. And I did wonder actually if my editor was going to suggest that some of my books have got maps in them, including I Found You's got a map. And I thought she might suggest a map for it, but we didn't get a map. But it is one of those settings that is suggestive of a map. And I think as a reader, you can probably find yourself picturing the layout and how the roads all link up and who lives where and what have you.
So Helen wants to know, she says, I just wondered whether you feel that writing in the present tense lends more intensity to a thriller.
I kind of, I muck around with tense quite a lot. I always used to write in the past tense, always. But the more my books have become, the more I've moved into thrillers, the more I've used present tense. And now I tend to very much use present tense for people whose storylines occupy the present tense, and past tense for characters who are in the backstory. So in this book, Tallulah's chapters are written in the past tense, and Kim and Sophie's chapters are written in the present tense. So I try to do that to kind of, because I know that sometimes readers can find it quite confusing when there's a lot of different threads and different timelines going on. So I think that's quite helpful. But I do think there's something, I don't know, there's something more immediate about the present tense. There's something more sort of cold, maybe, which kind of lends itself a little to that sense of unease that you might be trying to create in a thriller. But yeah, so I don't specifically or deliberately use it. I use it when I think it's the right tense.
Well, and I think one of the things that you do so well, especially with the multiple viewpoints and the multiple time periods, is you differentiate them enough that so by time you've switched once or twice, then it's almost you have a good idea of, oh, it's Sophie, so this is going to be the present, and like you do a really good job of getting people to be able to switch back and forth between them pretty early on in the process.
Yes, and I'm glad about that. Because I of course I read books as well, and I have read books where I found it really troublesome that I've moved from chapter to chapter and I haven't quite noticed that we've moved into a different character or a different timeline, and I get that sort of disconnect of just feeling a bit sort of wrong-footed and I'm not sure where I am anymore. So yeah, that's great that you think that I managed to carry that off in my books, because I think that's really important, because you don't want the reader to lose the sense of where they are in the book, because that just breaks the magic.
So Kay says she just finished The Family Upstairs today and she absolutely loved it. She loved the names that you used in the story, namely Clemency and Serenity. So how do you decide on details like names?
Oh, right. You're going to have to ask me that question again, because you just hung. Kay's just read The Family Upstairs and
absolutely loved it.
Yes.
She loved the names that you used in the story, namely Clemency and Serenity. So how do you decide on details like that, like character names and stuff?
Well, I do, particularly with children, and Clemency and Serenity are children in that book. I just get inside the head of their parents and think, well, what would people like this call their child? I know these people are, these characters are now sort of known to me, and I get what sort of person they are, where they come from, their priorities are. And if they were to have a kid, what would they call it? So that's kind of, and I just, we have David and I can't remember David's wife's name. But yeah, David and his wife, who see themselves as being a little bit sort of out there and a little bit profound and a little bit sort of removed, and would very much give their children quite a sort of over the top grand names like that. Whereas then there's Henry and Lucy, who have very traditional parents who would absolutely give their children very traditional names like Henry and Lucy. So yeah, that's how I do it. I just sort of think, in the real world, what would they call their kids?
So Sandy wants to know, how long did it take to write The Night She Disappeared?
So all my books are written in the same time frame. I couldn't tell you sort of exactly how long, how much in terms of how many hours the book takes to be written. But I finish a book in December. I then spend January and February editing that book alongside my UK editor. And then from the end of February, beginning of March, I start writing the next book. I write regularly, but not frantically for those first few months. And then it gets to the summer when the schools break up, and I'm generally about halfway through. So at the moment, the book I'm writing at the moment, I'm 45,000 words into it. Then I take the summer off because I need routine and quiet to write. And then there's no quiet or routine in a summer holiday when your children are around. And then I come back to the book in around this time, September. And then I start writing really quite intensely, and to the point where that's all I do. I don't go out or see anyone or make plans, or I try and limit the amount of publicity and what have you that I do. And then with the plan of finishing again in December. So it's like 2 big spurts of writing, but most of it happens in the sort of September to December bit.
So when you're taking that break for the summer, are you still thinking about the book? Are you making notes, or are you just, it's set aside and you're done?
It's set aside and I'm done. Yeah, I think I probably should be thinking about it. That would probably be quite helpful. But actually, maybe it's actually quite helpful just to leave it alone and come back to it completely fresh. And that would be the first thing I do when I get back to it after this tour. The first thing I do will be to reread it from the beginning, which is quite, it can be quite sort of, I don't know, just to refocus.
So since you're published in the US and the UK, and you have different editors for both, what is that process like when you're going through a US edit versus a UK edit? Or is there much that needs to get changed, or you kind of work with your editors enough that you don't have to deal with any of that?
Yeah, so my UK editor gets the really, really rough one, and she helps me polish it up. So she basically gets my first draft, which is quite unusual. Very few authors would give their editor a first draft. That is unusual. And I've never done it with any other editor I've ever had before, apart from this one, because she quite likes it. And I certainly appreciate it. So we have this quite intense sort of 4-6 week period of just getting the first draft into shape. And then it goes to everybody else. And so then, so everybody else then, so my agent, my American agent, my British agent, and my American editor then come back to me with their own notes, and I rework those into it as well. And then I get, of course, the American copy edit, which is the opportunity to Americanize the manuscript, which I'm very, very careful about, because I know that most of my readers in America like the Britishness of. And most of them understand all the British phraseology and terminology. And I'm very, very careful to only change things that I genuinely think my readership will have an issue with, and not just change things for the sake of it. So, yes, I cherry pick very carefully what I change.
Yeah, it seems like in the last, I don't know, however many years, it seems like, that there are less kind of Americanized things and just kind of books in general. And I'm sure some of that's because, with BritBox and things like that, like we're used to, we can watch British TV and we can read more British, and some people you have a little bit more exposure to it. So you're a little bit more familiar with things like that.
Yes, which is an exact, British people are so familiar with American terminology and language use, because we were all brought up watching American TV. It was just staple for us to watch as the whole world was brought up watching American TV, in fact. And so we get all the Americanizations. We know all your brands, and we know all your, the different words that you use for things. But it's maybe slowly coming around the other way now, so there won't have to be so much Americanization going the other way.
So going back to, you mentioning kind of putting the book down for the summer, Rebecca wants to know, have you ever been well into writing a book and realized that you needed to start over or change direction?
Only once. I was writing a book, which I then did write again about 3 years afterwards. It was a book that actually turned out to be The Third Wife. So I was writing this book about this man who'd been married 3 times. And I had a better idea halfway through writing it. I just had a better idea, one that really grabbed me. And I went to my agent at the time. I had a different agent then, and I said, I've had an idea, and I kind of think I'd like to abandon this book and start another one. And I thought she'd say, no, you can't do that. Carry on. And she said, go for it. And that was the book that was The Truth About Melody Brown, which just came out in the US for the first time earlier this year. But that's the only time. I'm usually dogged. Once I've started a book, I'm usually just like, no, I'm going to make this work. If it kills me, I'm going to make this book work. I am not starting again. But yeah, that was the only time I've done that.
So I want to get name right for this question. So Haiti wants to know, do you think you'll ever go back and do books that aren't thrillers again, kind of like your first ones? No?
No, I was always on this was the journey. This was my destination. This was always written in the stars. I was always meant to be writing these books. And I just went on this slightly circuitous journey through different genres. And all of that was brilliant because all of it informs my writing now. And all of it was part of, the learning curve of becoming a good writer of thrillers. So I wouldn't take any of those books back. But I certainly would never go back and write in those genres again. No, I'm here where I want to be forever.
I like to hear that. I love when authors try other things too, but I love that thrillers is where you're happy, and that means
yes. Oh yes.
Thrillers, definitely. So going with that, so Beth wants to know, she says she's read all of your books and she wants to know, how did you successfully move from writing rom-com to thrillers? She's trying to do the same thing and hitting a bug wall with agents.
Ah, interesting. I was lucky enough to be able to do it really organically. I know a lot of writers who've taken the jump from writing, Paula Hawkins is one of them, in fact, who've taken the big leap from writing romantic comedies, thinking, I don't want to write romantic comedies or romance. I want to write darker stuff. And often they have to change their name in order to start afresh. But I was in a very fortunate position of getting to a certain point in my career where my sales slowed down, which gave me a little bit of breathing space, where I realized I wasn't the focus of my publisher's attention in quite the same way as I had been. They weren't expecting me to write any particular sort of book. So I was able to very gradually, book by book, move away from romantic comedy, move into darker themes, and then move out of those sort of family sagas and into thrillers without anybody really noticing. But I think making that jump, if you go straight from one genre to another, is really challenging. And I can't really offer any advice, but I know some people have made a real success of it. So I think maybe just keep going.
And I feel like readers now are a little bit more willing to follow people from authors from genre to genre, so they don't have to change names quite as much as they used to. It used to be like, no, you can't do that. I feel like readers now kind of read kind of across the board and are a little bit more willing to take the ride with you.
Well, let's hope so. Yeah.
So I have a couple character questions. So Carrie Ann wants to know, what steps do you take to develop a character? Does it come to you as you write? I'm
wondering if that's Carrie Ann Mulligan.
It is.
Carrie Ann. Do you recognize the name?
Yeah.
Yes.
I saw it, Fred. I was like, is her character asking?
Whoa, yeah. Yeah, so Carrie Ann, I think it was a relative of Carrie Ann's in the UK, bid on a character name in my book for a charity auction over here in the UK, and won. And she donated Carrie Ann's name to me, who is, as you now know, a character in The Night She Disappeared. And now I can't remember what Carrie Ann's question was. You have to repeat it.
So what steps do you take to develop a character? Does it just come to you as you write?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's just like little jigsaw puzzle pieces, tiny, and so every scene I write with a character, I learn something new about them. Just so, for example, I don't know what Carrie Ann looks like, which is good, because if you're going to be given a name to work with, you don't want a visual in your mind. I just had a name, and then I had to find a character to give Carrie Ann's name to. it was the name of the matron at the boarding school. So the woman who's in sort of pastoral care of all the children at the school. And so she's not one of the biggest characters in the book, but I had a very, very strong sense of who she was. It's just tiny little things like she wears bejeweled flip-flops, and she walks around with this huge set of keys, and she has this sort of very kind of friendly relationship with her daughter. It just, so every time I wrote a scene with Kerry Ann in it, I learned a little bit more about her. And they kind of tell you who they are as you write them. So it's just a matter of just letting the characters just sort of kind of unfold on the page, show you who they are. But yes, thank you for your great name, Kerry Ann. I hope you like the character.
And so Sandra wants to know then, have you ever met someone that has immediately inspired a character in a novel?
Immediately. Not met. Maybe I have. God, I mean, I've written so many characters now. It's possible I have had that moment, but I don't recall it. But the family upstairs, Lucy, was based on a woman who I saw. I didn't actually talk to her or meet her, but I saw her just out the corner of my eye when I was on holiday in the south of France, just for a brief, fleeting glimpse of this woman. And she was the inspiration for the whole book. I just wanted to know who she was and what her story was and where she came from and what had happened to her. And so I had to write a book to find out. So no, that has happened.
Yeah. So Kerry Ann has responded and she says, yes, thank you. She is honored. And she says, thank you to Linda J. Richardson. So
Linda, that's it. Yes. It was Linda. It was Linda who bought the name for her.
So you have frozen a little bit. Are you still there, Lisa?
Oh,
okay. There you go. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, you froze as well. But yeah, there we go. Here we both are.
Yeah. So I love hearing you talk about your books because I love that you're like discovering these characters and all of this stuff. It feels like you're right there along with us as we're reading and trying to figure out kind of what's happening. I love that it's like that for you as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. Obviously it's slower because you could read my book in a day and it takes me 6 months or whatever. Yeah. So it's a slower process, but I think it's informed by the same sort of energy and the same sort of emotions as the reader, which I love that. I love that about it, that sort of connection that I have there.
So when you're, as a reader, if you're reading a book, are you trying to figure it out, or are you just along for the ride and you want to be surprised?
I'm along for the ride and I want to be surprised. If I'm reading a book and I'm sort of trying to work out, or I can see what the writer's done, that's disappointing to me. I don't ever want to see that. Yeah. I want to be absolutely sucked up and swept away and not even think about the craft or what was going through the writer's head or how they managed to pull something off. I don't want to think about that. I just want to be in it.
So Catherine wants to know, what is your favorite part of the writing process?
There is, I try and write 1,000 words a day. So any day where I've written 1,000 words is a good day. And that is a really nice feeling. It's the loveliest feeling to know that you sat down for 3 hours to do something and you've done it. And I don't worry too much about whether I've written 1,000 good words or 1,000 bad words, as long as the 1,000 words are there. So just having done a day's work is just a really, really lovely feeling. But every now and then there's a little magical thing that happens and you just know it. You just know that you've just written something really good, or you've just solved a problem, or you've just moved the story along to somewhere that's actually opened up a whole new realm of possibilities that you're quite excited to get into. So you get these little magical moments as well in between. They're just like 1,000 words, 1,000 words, 1,000 words, and every now and then just like, wow, how did that happen?
Someone asked so Sierra wants to know, I'm going to make this a two-part question because we could potentially clarify it a little bit, and it's an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
What is your, not one that you've written, but what is your all-time favorite book?
All-time favorite book. Right.
Or
I
top
have.
few. I know, all-time favorites.
Oh God, I can't. Yeah, this is terrible. I've usually got about 10 of anything that you ask me what my favorite anything is. Um, I will say, just in terms of a book that I have read within recent times that has stayed with me, um, that I think had something in it that was more than just reading, that took me into a completely different emotional plane. Was a book that I don't even know if it's out in America, which would be frustrating if it isn't. It's by a British writer called Julie Myerson, and it's called The Stopped Heart. And it is a kind of, it's a domestic thriller, but it's also got sort of undertones of a ghost story running through it as well. And it's kind of scary and very sad, and but really fast moving, and yeah, swallows you whole. It's an emotional roller coaster.
So I don't know if it's still available, but it has been released here in the States. So I'm going to drop a link to that
Oh,
in
good,
the comments.
good,
It
good.
came out here in 2016, which in the book world can be old sometimes. So I'm going to drop a
Yeah,
link. So if anybody's interested in checking it out, it sounds great.
yeah.
And so then so the second half of that is, do you have a favorite book of your own that you've written?
Uh, every writer will always say that the book that they're promoting at that moment is a favorite because it's your new baby and everybody's talking about it and you want everybody to love it and it's all shiny and new and exciting, and current. So yeah, I'm very, very into The Night She Disappeared at the moment.
Yeah.
But from my back list, I've got a couple of favorites. I love The House We Grew Up In, which was my novel about the mother with obsessive hoarding disorder. Um, and I love, if anybody wants to look at my romantic backlist, my romantic comedies, I would highly recommend Vince and Joy. That's my favorite of all my romantic comedies. And yeah, I've got a bit of a soft spot for I Found You as well, I think.
So how do you pick a title? I've been asking thriller writers this question lately because, you know,
Mm.
I imagine for especially the type of thrillers that you write, titles are tricky because they have to be a couple of words. They have to be a couple of words that tell you what the story is, but they also have to be not the same couple of words that other people have used. So how do you come up with
Mhm.
titles?
Well, yeah, so I always have a working title, and I very much accept that nobody's ever going to let me use my working titles. So just for the sake of interest, the working title for The Family Upstairs was The Baby. My working title for Invisible Girl was Creep, and my working title for this book was Dark Place, which I actually thought was an awesome title, Dark Place. But it didn't give the Lisa Jewell feeling. It
Yeah.
didn't, and my publishers like my titles to kind of tell a tiny bit of the story, so the reader kind of gets a sense of. So they try not to be abstract. So yeah, so this was a bit of brainstorming happened, and lots of people gave suggestions, and then this one, I can't remember if this was my suggestion or somebody in the team's suggestion. But yeah, so it's that sort of trying to, yeah, like I say, give a little tiny hint of the story, as you say, not reuse language or words that have been used in other best-selling novels, which is really tricky, really tricky. And yeah, and also have that kind of Lisa Jewell sound to it as well. So
Yeah.
that's how it works. It's quite business-like.
So Linda says that after reading I Found You, she wanted to be BFFs with Alice. So my
Oh,
question is, so if you had to pick one of your characters that you could just go grab a drink with and hang out with, who would you pick?
I think Alice, and I had forgotten about Alice, and somebody else asked me this question the other day, and I was humming and hawing and saying, "Oh, I don't know," and they said, "Well, what about Alice?" And I was like, "Of course, Alice, Alice," because yeah, Alice had been going to be in a novel that I'd wanted to write a novel about a couple who meet in a suicide chat forum. um, and everybody I mentioned this idea to said, no, you cannot write about that. Nobody's going to want to read that book. No, you probably remember me talking about this when I was promoting I Found You all those years ago. And so I sort of like with my tail between my legs just gave up on this idea of writing this story about these people who met in a suicide chat forum. but kept Alice. I was very taken with the whole concept of Alice because I kind of worked out who she was, and yeah, I love Alice, and she would definitely be my pub companion of choice.
So Anne wants to know: have you ever written a character that you disliked so much that it made it hard to write about him or her?
No, they're the best ones. They're the best ones. I mean, God, the fun I had writing Noelle, and then she was gone. Who's quite the most revolting character I've ever written, I think. Noelle, although there are some pretty nasty ones in the family upstairs as well. No, the more awful they are, the more fun they are to write about. A lot of my characters, I leave a lot of ambiguity in them, purely so that I've got things to work with. As I was saying earlier, I need to sort of keep my options open. But when I get the chance to write someone who has no ambiguity at all, who is just genuinely a bad person, they are the most fun to write about.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you were working on a sequel to The Family Upstairs. Can you tell us anything about that, or are you still too in the process to not talk about it yet?
I can talk about it to a certain extent. Yeah, as it's halfway through, and clearly I'm revisiting Henry, and clearly for anyone who's read the book, Henry wants to find Finn. We've found Finn. We know that he's working as a safari guide in Botswana, and so Henry's off on a mission to find Finn. We've also got Lucy, who's trying to get some sort of sense of normality in her life. She's finally got some money and she can settle down, but she's being stalked by, or thinks she's being stalked by, a woman called Rachel. And Rachel, for those with very good memories, was Michael's wife at the time that Michael was killed by Lucy in the first book. So Rachel is the third perspective. So there's quite a lot going on. I've also threaded through it. There's a backstory of a pair of detectives called Sienna and Sam, who have found a bag of bones washed up on the shores of the River Thames, and have just identified them as belonging to a young woman called Birdie. So that's where I'm at the moment. There's quite a lot going on. And even with all that's going on, there's still other things, that are still other loose threads that I could come back to from the original and then bring them back out. But yeah, for now, those are the threads that I'm playing with.
Awesome. And for anybody wondering, time frame wise, so that should come out around this time next year.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. So I think that is going to run us at time this evening. So just to recap for anybody who might have joined us late, we have been chatting with Lisa Jewell, whose new book, The Night She Disappeared, just came out here in the US on Tuesday. We do have signed copies of it at Murder by the Book, so you can just visit murderbooks.com. If you order it, you'll get a signed copy. We hope that you will do that if you haven't picked up one yet already. If you missed any part of our chat, you can rewatch on Facebook and YouTube. Once we're done, they'll archive it, so it'll be up there. And also, while you're on the YouTube channel, if you just search for Lisa Jewell, you'll get to see the chat we did with her and Ruth Ware last year. We've been able to chat with Lisa several times throughout the pandemic, so lots of great chances to hear her talk about her other books. Also wanted to send once again a big thank you to Ariel at Atria and Simon & Schuster, who's just fantastic. And also again a big thank you to Lisa for staying up in the middle of the night to chat with us.
I want to go out partying now.
So Lisa, once again, thank you. Congratulations on the new book. Like I said, it's one of my favorites in a while. So I mean, I've loved all of the others too. So but this one was it's so fantastic. I'm so excited for people to read it. And thank you everybody for tuning in with us this evening. And so everyone keep your fingers crossed. This time next year, we will be sitting here in the bookstore in Houston, getting to do this, giving Lisa a big hug and being able to talk about the book in person.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
My pleasure. Have a good
I'll
evening.
see you next year.
Yes, definitely. Go get some sleep.
Thank you.
Thanks.